Okay, so thank you for clicking over to part 2. We're going to get right into it. On November 29th at the XL London, Queensberry Promotions going to be putting on one hell of a show. If you like domestic fights, and you're a British fan, and you like boxing, and you're listening to me, well then you're about to hear a great treat. I'm sure most of you have heard this in bits and pieces, but when you really put it together, this show is really pretty damn awesome. No other words for it. I'm sure there are, actually. I'm just too stupid to figure them out. But in any event, it's really a great show. You have the main event. This was obviously the nucleus of the show. Originally scheduled for earlier this year. A lot of things we don't need to get into right now got in the way of that fight happening. But it's happening now. And it's the rematch between Derek Chisora and Tyson Fury. The winner of this heavyweight contest will take on, or at least will become a mandatory at the very least, to take on heavyweight champion of the world, Vladimir Klitschko, at some point in the future. It is a rematch, but in the end, their first engagement was such a long time ago that they're both different fighters, different entities at this point. It really is a fresh, new, interesting fight in that respect. And really, the interesting part about this card is that this is the only fight that sort of needed to happen. In order for them to advance and get a shot at a title, they had to take on each other, or a like opponent. Someone that, that had a bit of a name, had a bit of risk to them, and there was some financial reward in there as well. But other than that, the three other fights that have sort of caught my attention and that have been announced don't need to happen. They really don't. And yet they're great matchups, and they're going to happen. There's one that I have a bit of an issue with in the past that I said I personally wouldn't necessarily need to see right now. But I'm fine with seeing it, don't get me wrong. So I'm still thrilled that it's been announced, thrilled that it's taking place. It might actually steal the show in terms of the promotion because these two do not like each other. And that is, of course, the chief support for the bout, or for that evening, which will be a middleweight contest between bitter rivals, Billy Joe Saunders and Chris Eubank Jr. Middleweights, both got a tremendous amount of skill and backing. Both seem to want the other to suffer some pain, and they're both unbeaten. It's really a very interesting fight. It's certainly the biggest step up for Chris Eubank. It will be easily the most skilled opponent he's faced thus far. And for Saunders, in order to get this rivalry out of the way, is risking a mandatory position with the WBO. Now, of course, mandatory positions and rankings and all that sort of stuff can be quite convoluted, so who knows how close he was, in fact, to a title shot. But nonetheless, he was quite close, is my point, and yet just to earn the chance to punch Chris Eubank in the face, something he, I'm sure, dreams of doing because they don't seem to like each other at all, he's risking that to make this fight. It's a very compelling showdown. But that would be enough. To be truthful, most people would be fine with just that. But then you have a very interesting welterweight clash between once beaten Frankie Gavin, fresh off his first loss, mind you, taking on unbeaten Bradley Skeet. Now, of course, Gavin has to get through an October bout, which will just effectively be a tune-up. He's coming off the Leonard Bundu loss, the first of his professional career. So, of course, a stay busy / tuna fight is in order, and it makes total sense. I doubt it'll be anything that serious because of the fight that's been announced for November, so he gets rid of his opponent in October, which I assume he does, and then faces Bradley Skeet. Again, a fight that doesn't need to happen. Gavin could just as easily work towards that Bundu rematch if it were possible financially, because Bundu, in a sense, rightfully so, is asking for a decent amount of money, and Skeet could continue to build, step himself up a little slower, because Gavin will probably be his toughest test to date. Make no mistake about it, loss or not, Gavin is still a very impressive welterweight when it comes to skills. He doesn't have tremendous power, he's not always the most exciting, but he does have a lot of heart, as he did show in the Bundu loss, and he is a skilled competitor. Neither guy needs a fight, and yet either will get something tremendous with a win. A loss, on the other hand, sets the other back quite a great deal, particularly Gavin. It could almost be excusable with Skeet because of the circumstances, biggest step up to date. But Gavin would have lost 2 out of his last 3, if this is assuming he gets through in October. And Skeet, at this point, would still sort of be considered a domestic foe. He should be better than Skeet. So, it's a very interesting fight that, again, doesn't necessarily need to happen now. Just like the 4th fight that has been announced for this incredible Box Nation event, which is a junior lightweight bout between Gary Sykes and Liam Walsh. A couple of regional titles on the line, but more importantly, big step up for Walsh, and Sykes is a very, that's actually a bit of an overstatement. It's a step up, sure, but Walsh has put in a bit of a graft, as they say, and has stepped himself up nicely. And Sykes is a very, capable professional fighter. So it's a very interesting fight in its own right, and truthfully, out of the 4, it's probably the quote-unquote weakest of the 4 fights, and it's still a very good fight. This is all on one show, and still a couple of months out here, so who knows what will be added in terms of prospects, stay busy fights, so on and so forth, but this is one hell of a show. And it's sort of the show that Frank Warren and company need, to be quite truthful, because I don't know if you guys have noticed this or anything, but Matchroom Boxing has been beating the living dog shit out of Queensberry when it comes to shows for quite some time now. And I'm not talking about the quality of fights, that's opinion, and you can have your opinion, you're more than entitled to it. But the fact remains that when it comes to shows that are talked about, that have names that people discuss, Matchroom has pretty much been casting quite the big, heavy shadow on Queensberry Promotion. This has been happening for the last couple of years, and this is the first time that I can really say, you know what? This card has me very interested. I believe there's going to be a Matchroom show on the same day, and I'm not excusing, or rather, I'm not trying to dismiss that card. I'm sure it'll be a pretty interesting one. It certainly has to be if it's going to look to go up against this show. I believe it's going to be at the Echo Arena in Liverpool, which leads me to believe it could be the Tony Bellew Nathan Cleverly contest, but I'm not sure, and I'm not even sure that fight has been finalized just yet, so who knows. Besides the point, because even if it is that show, which would be very entertaining in its own right, this competes. And this is, again, for the first time in a long time, this is the first time Warren has been able to rightfully claim that he's actually putting up, quote-unquote, a fight with Matchroom. And it's good. This is good news, people. I know a lot of people they didn't like the Cold War between Showtime and HBO and Golden Boy and Top Rank, but you got a lot of good fights when those companies weren't working together, because they had to put on good shows to capture your attention. And the other company, of course, and the other network had to put on good, compelling fights to capture your attention as well. And they had to trim a lot of the fat, because it was less acceptable, because the other shows were so good. And it didn't work out every time. You still had plenty of stinkers, fights that you didn't want to see happen, that didn't need to happen, that benefited absolutely no one. But more often than not, you got some pretty compelling shows, because when there's competition, you need to do everything. You need to pull all stops to try to ensure that you're going to get fans and consumers, effectively, to pay attention. It's a good sign for, if you're a Matchroom Boxing fan, for some reason, if you are for whatever unrealistic or just completely idiotic reason, if you're loyal to one company, in this case Matchroom, it's a good sign that Queensberry is putting up good shows like this, and you should hope they continue to do so, because it's only going to make Matchroom work even harder to continue to be #1 in the UK. And if you're a Queensberry fan, again, I don't know why you would call yourself a fan of either. You should just be a fan of good fights, and who cares who's staging them. But if you're a Queensberry fan, this is obviously good news, because it at least means that Warren and company have the talent to put up a fight if they do it the right way. Take a few risks and make the fights happen. And to me, this is a great sign. I love it. And you know what? Even if it doesn't start a trend for Warren and the rest of his shows are just absolutely terrible, which they haven't been, in my opinion. They just haven't been as good as the Matchroom shows. But even if the rest are absolutely abysmal for the next year, this is at the very least standalone a very good show. And I greatly look forward to it. I'm almost giddy with happiness, because the boxing nerd in me is able to come out. It says everything you want. It has some domestic intrigue, has some world level implications. There's some bitterness in the main event and the co-main event, and then there's just some intrigue and some wonder about the other two fights that have been announced that are sort of the main attractions to the show. It's definitely a good show, and I'm really looking forward to it. And I'd love to, of course, hear your take on the show itself, and you can give me some predictions on those ones. I have no idea who's going to win. I'm just probably going to put their names in a hat and draw them randomly, and just like I do with every prediction I make. But I'd love to hear yours. Perhaps you can put a little more thought into it. Tell me who you think's going to take those fights. Tell me what you think of the show. And, of course, criticize me for the douchebag that I am. And, schedule coming up this weekend. Of course, the two big shows, in my personal opinion, take place on Saturday, the 27th, in Kiel, Germany. You have super middleweight titleist Arthur Abraham defending against Paul Smith. Pretty interesting international fight. Should be pretty interesting. You can check out the pick'em for that fight below in the description. And in Canada, you have Artur Beterbiev, I believe is how you would butcher that name, taking on Tavares Cloud at light heavyweight. Again, should be an interesting little contest. Cloud is expected to be the name that Archer disposes of as he moves his way up the rankings, but Cloud punches hard enough that he can at least keep it interesting for as long as the fight lasts, so it should be an interesting fight there as well. You have Antonin Dekhari and Dirijan, I believe, also competing on the undercard for that fight, and you can check all of this out, of course, in the schedule link below in the description. And of course, like, comment, share, subscribe, all that great stuff. Tell me what you think, and of course, hit me up on Twitter at 12RounderBoxing, and be sure to visit 12rounder.com. And until next time, enjoy the fights.